You've been sitting on those accounts long enough, Lauren. We know exactly what you've been stashing away while the rest of us scramble. Sign the transfer papers today, or I'll make sure every contact in your precious professional circle learns how you've been siphoning family money to prop up your image. Hi, my name is Lauren Nicole Reed. I am 31 years old. The words hung in the quiet corner booth of the Lakeside Cafe tucked against the hillside villas overlooking Lake Mendota. My older sister, Vanessa, had chosen the spot deliberately neutral ground, public enough to keep things civil on the surface, private enough that no one would interrupt her. She slid the thick folder across the polished wood toward me, her manicured nails tapping once on the cover like a judge's gavel. I kept my face blank, my breathing even. Cold settled in my chest the way it always did when she spoke to me like this, as if I were an inconvenience she had tolerated for 31 years and was finally done pretending otherwise. I had come to the meeting expecting another round of the usual complaints about how I never helped enough with family matters. What I got instead was the first clear view of the concealed account draining my older sister and my mother had been running behind my back for the last 14 months. The folder contained doctored statements from a joint investment trust my late father had set up years ago, the same trust I had been contributing my forensic auditor bonuses to every quarter, believing it was being managed conservatively for all of us. The numbers didn't lie. Large, unexplained withdrawals had been funneled into Vanessa's personal accounts and my mother's discretionary spending, disguised as family maintenance fees. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was surgical quiet and had been happening while I sat in my Madison office, tracing fraud for other people's companies. Vanessa leaned back, crossing her arms, her expression the same detached superiority she had worn since we were teenagers. Mom and I discussed it. You make more than enough at that auditing firm. It's only fair you carry a little extra weight so the rest of us don't have to downsize. She said it without heat, as if stating the weather. No apology, no hesitation. Just cold expectation that I would fall in line the way I always had when she pushed. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the folder and scanned the first page, my trained eye catching the mismatched transaction codes immediately. My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed flat when I finally spoke. These withdrawals weren't authorized by the trust terms. You both know that. She smiled thinly. Details. The trust was always meant to support the family. Your family, Lauren. Or at least you used to act like it before you got too important with your spreadsheets and your independence. The jab landed exactly where she intended, but I refused to flinch. I had spent years learning how to keep my face neutral while uncovering corporate theft. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction now. The cafe hummed around us with the low chatter of other patrons, none of them aware that my older sister had just admitted in her own indirect way to the pact she and my mother had formed to quietly bleed the accounts I helped fund. I closed the folder and set it back on the table between us. I'm not signing anything until I have an independent review. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, but her tone remained ice calm. You do that, and I'll start making calls. Your boss at the firm, those clients you're so proud of, they all think you're the reliable one. How do you think they'll feel when they hear you've been involved in questionable family financial maneuvers? She let the threat settle, then added softly, Mom already has the paperwork ready at home. We expected you might need a little persuasion. I stood up, leaving the folder where it was. The coldness in my chest had crystallized into something sharper, more focused. I had come here thinking this was just another demand. Now I understood it was the beginning of something deliberate and coordinated. As I walked out into the crisp Wisconsin air, the hillside villas rising behind me like silent witnesses, I already knew I wouldn't sign. What I didn't know yet was how deep the draining had gone or how far my mother and sister were willing to push when I refused. That night back in my quiet apartment a few miles from the lake, I sat at my dining table with my laptop open and began the slow, methodical process of pulling every statement I could access. The numbers confirmed what I had suspected in the cafe, over $400,000 siphoned in the last year alone, mostly into Vanessa's lifestyle expenses, and my mother's attempts to maintain the appearance of comfort in their hillside villa. They hadn't even tried to hide the transfers very well once they thought I wouldn't look. The realization settled over me like a second skin, detached, almost clinical. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice they had made together. The next morning at the auditing firm downtown, I kept my usual routine reviewing client files, With the same precision I always did. My boss, Mr. Robert Harlan, stopped by my desk mid-morning with his usual brisk nod. Read the quarterly compliance report on the Nelson account. Looks solid. Keep that up. I thanked him and kept typing, but inside the cold calculation continued. I couldn't risk any hint of instability at work while I figured out how to respond. Reputation in this field was everything, and I knew my older sister understood that better than most. By afternoon, the first ripple hit. An anonymous email landed in my work inbox from an untraceable address. It contained screenshots of 3 large transfers from the family trust, the same ones I had spotted the night before, along with a short note. You're not the only one watching the accounts. Protect yourself before they rewrite the story. I stared at the screen for a long moment, pulsey steady. The anonymous tip didn't feel like help, so much as confirmation that someone else had noticed the theft. It also meant the draining was no longer invisible. I forwarded the email to my personal secure drive, deleted the original from my work account, and kept working. The bomb was ticking, but I would be the one to decide when it went off. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice was the same measured, disappointed tone she had used my entire adult life whenever I failed to meet her unspoken expectations. Vanessa told me you walked out of the meeting. We're only trying to keep the family stable, Lauren. Your father would have wanted us to handle this together. I listened without interrupting, letting the words wash over me. When she finished, I replied in the same detached voice I had perfected. I'm having the trust statements independently audited. Until then, no transfers leave the account. She sighed the way she always did when I refused to bend. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Vanessa is already talking to people about how stressed you've been at work. You know how quickly rumors spread in our circles. The threat was softer than my sister's, but it carried the same weight. Reputation damage spreads quickly when the right people start whispering. I ended the call without raising my voice, but the cold resolve inside me had hardened another degree. That evening, I met with my trusted colleague, Dr. Ethan James Caldwell, at a small coffee shop near the Capitol. Ethan had been my mentor when I first joined the firm and had helped me on the several complex fraud cases. I showed him the statements and the anonymous tip without emotion. He read through them in silence, then looked up, his expression grave. This is deliberate concealment, Lauren. The pattern matches classic intra-family asset misappropriation. You need to lock everything down and document every step. I nodded once. I already started. Before we parted, he slid a business card across the table. Sophia Marie Bennett, private investigator I've used before. Discreet, thorough, and she owes me a favor. Tell her I sent you. I took the card and thanked him. The network was forming quietly around me while my older sister and mother continued to believe they still held the leverage. The following week, the first public ripple appeared. A mutual acquaintance in the Madison financial community mentioned in passing that Vanessa had been concerned about my recent erratic decisions regarding Baum family investments. The comment was delivered with polite sympathy, but I recognized the opening salvo of the reputation campaign. I smiled thinly and changed the subject, but inside, I noted the date and time. Every jab would be cataloged. Late that night, alone in my apartment, I opened the voice memo app on my phone and tested the recording quality. I had already decided the next family conversation would not be left to memory. My older sister had demanded loyalty. My mother had reminded me of family duty. Neither of them understood yet that the loyalty test had already been failed by them. The anonymous tip had given me the first piece of outside confirmation. Now I needed the pact itself on record. I set the phone down and stared at the glowing screen of my laptop, the cold detachment I had carried since the cafe settling deeper. The trust I had once felt for them was gone, replaced by something cleaner, sharper, and entirely my own. Whatever came next, I would face it without illusion. The decision to record felt like the only logical next step in the cold calculation that had taken over my thoughts. I reached out to Sophia Marie Bennett the following morning using the card from my mentor, and we met at her small downtown office near the Capitol building. She listened as I described the statements and the anonymous tip without any unnecessary emotion, my voice staying flat and even. Sophia was a private investigator who specialized in financial matters for people in my line of work, and her questions were precise and professional. She took copies of everything and promised a full review within 48 hours. In the meantime, I kept my routine at the auditing firm, Exactly as it had always been reviewing client files with the same detached precision I applied to every case. My boss, Mr. Robert Harlan, stopped by my desk that afternoon with his usual brisk approval of the latest compliance report. Read this Nelson account work is solid as always. Keep that level of detail. I thanked him and returned to my screen, but the first visible crack in my professional world appeared later that same day. My colleague, Allison Pierce, a senior auditor I had collaborated with on multiple high-profile reviews, pulled me aside after a team huddle. Her tone was careful, almost apologetic. "Lauren, I heard from a contact in our network that your older sister has been expressing concerns about some family financial decisions you are making. It sounded like it might be affecting your focus here. Everything all right?" The question was polite, but the implication was unmistakable. The reputation damage my older sister had threatened was already spreading through the quiet channels of the Madison financial community. I met her eyes without flinching. "It's a private family matter being addressed. Thank you for mentioning it." Allison nodded, but I could see the seed of doubt had been planted. Sophia called me late the next evening with initial findings. The concealed account draining went back further than the 14 months I had first spotted, and she had uncovered something unexpected through the anonymous tips lead. A misplaced copy of an amended trust document had been left in a shared bank folder by accident. The paper showed my older sister and my mother had attempted to insert clauses giving them broader discretion over my contributions without notifying me or obtaining proper approval. The copy had been flagged internally by the bank manager, Thomas Riley, during a routine compliance check, but no action had been taken yet. Sophia's voice remained clinical. This document alone could trigger financial penalties imposed by the trust terms if we pursue it formally. Combined with the transaction patterns, it paints a clear picture of deliberate concealment. I absorbed the information without reaction. The twist fit neatly into the larger picture I was building, but it also meant the stakes had risen. I asked Sophia to keep digging while I arranged the next move. I suggested a follow-up lunch at the same lakeside cafe, framing it as a chance to discuss the independent review results calmly. My older sister and my mother agreed almost immediately, likely believing they could apply more pressure in person. Before I left my apartment on the day of the meeting, I tested the voice memo app on my phone one final time and slipped the device into the inner pocket of my blazer, making sure the microphone was unobstructed. They were already seated when I arrived. My mother, Margaret Elaine Reed, looked across the table with her usual measured poise, the same expression she had worn through every disagreement we had ever had. My older sister sat beside her, arms crossed, her face carrying that familiar detached superiority. The conversation opened with the expected calm demands. Margaret spoke first, her tone even and reasonable on the surface. "Lauren, we've been more than patient. The family trust was always intended to support all of us, not just one person's career. It's time to stop making this difficult." My older sister leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying the cold sarcasm she reserved exclusively for me. "You've always acted like your income is yours alone, little sister. We had to make adjustments because Mom needed to maintain the villa, and I have ongoing expenses from the divorce that you never had to worry about. It was a simple pact between us, family first. You've been contributing for years. It was only fair we use some of it to balance things out. Sign the papers, and this all goes away quietly." She said it without raising her voice, as if the admission was the most natural thing in the world. My mother nodded in agreement. "Your father would have expected us to handle the money this way. We discussed it at length and decided the transfers were necessary. You owe the family that much after everything we've done to support your independence." I listened without interrupting, letting every word settle into the recording. They laid out the pact in plain terms, the deliberate choice to drain the accounts for my older sister's lifestyle needs, and my mother's efforts to keep up appearances at the hillside villa, all while presenting it as fair family support. No apologies, no hesitation, just the same cold expectation that I would fall in line. When they finished, I kept my expression neutral and replied in the same detached tone I had used since the first cafe meeting. "I'll review the independent audit and let you know my decision." I stood up, left the folder they had brought untouched on the table, and walked out into the crisp air overlooking the lake. The phone in my pocket felt heavier now, but the weight was satisfying in its own quiet way. Back at my apartment, I transferred the recording to my secure drive and sent a copy to Sophia. She reviewed it the next morning and confirmed what I already knew. This is direct evidence of the pact and the unauthorized draining. We can use it to support any formal action. She recommended bringing in an attorney immediately and introduced me to Gregory Lang, a trust and estate specialist she had worked with on similar cases. Gregory met with us that afternoon in his office a few blocks from the firm. He was straightforward and methodical as he reviewed the statements, the misplaced contract copy, and the recording. The financial penalties imposed for this kind of concealment could be substantial restitution, court-ordered repayments, and potential damage to their credit and standing. We have a strong position here. The reputation damage continued to spread while we prepared the next steps. 2 days after the recorded lunch, Mr. Robert Harlan called me into his office again. His expression was professional but concerned. "Lauren, I've now received a formal note from one of our long-term clients who heard through mutual circles that there may be irregularities in your personal financial dealings. They're asking whether it could affect the audit timeline. I've reassured them it's a private matter, but we need this resolved quickly to protect the firm's reputation." The secondary conflict had moved from whispers to documented inquiries. I assured him the situation was being handled through proper legal channels and returned to my desk, the cold calculation ticking forward without pause. Sophia's next update arrived that evening via a secure message. The anonymous tip had led her to a recoverable email thread between my older sister and my mother that had been deleted from their primary accounts but remained in a cloud backup. The messages confirmed the pact in even more detail and referenced the misplaced contract copy as the mechanism they had used to justify the transfers. Gregory reviewed the new material and advised filing a formal notice with the bank to freeze further activity while we prepared the case. I authorized the steps without hesitation. That night my phone buzzed with another message from the anonymous source. It was short and direct. "They know you're investigating. Watch your back at work. The board complaint is already being prepared." The warning landed with quiet precision. The pressure from the reputation front was accelerating, and the next escalation felt imminent. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of my apartment, the cold detachment holding steady. The evidence was mounting, the pact was documented, and the financial penalties were now a real possibility. Yet I could sense the final confrontation was still building, and whatever came next would test exactly how far my older sister and my mother were willing to push when their control began to slip. The board complaint threat materialized 2 days later. Mr. Robert Harlan called me into his office with a serious expression. "Lauren, there's now a formal complaint from the professional network regarding your handling of family trust matters. It's being reviewed by HR and the Ethics Committee. We need your side of the story immediately to protect your standing here." I remained calm and detached as I explained the situation, factually providing copies of the statements, the anonymous tip, and the recording without emotion. Mr. Harlan listened carefully, then nodded once. "This stays internal for now, but the optics aren't great. Resolve it quickly." The secondary conflict had escalated exactly as my older sister had promised. Reputation damage spreads quickly when the right whispers start, and hers had reached the firm's inner circle. Gregory Lang filed the formal motion with the bank that same afternoon based on the recording and the misplaced amended trust document that Thomas Riley had flagged months earlier. The bank's internal compliance team moved fast once the evidence was presented. Within 48 hours, the trust account was frozen pending full review. Sophia Marie Bennett followed up with the final piece from the anonymous source, a recovered email thread between my older sister and my mother that had been deleted but preserved in a backup server. The last document flipped the entire story. It was an internal bank memo attached to the thread dated weeks before the cafe meeting, explicitly outlining how they had used the amended clauses to justify the concealed draining without my knowledge or consent. The memo included projected financial penalties imposed under the trust's strict anti-misappropriation rules, restitution plus interest, plus a permanent notation on their personal credit files that would follow them in every future financial dealing in the Madison professional community. I read the memo once, then closed the file. The cold detachment I had carried since the first meeting never wavered. This was no longer speculation or family drama. It was documented, enforceable, and final. My older sister and my mother demanded a meeting at the Hillside Villa the next evening. I agreed, but only on the condition that Gregory Lang and Sophia accompany me as witnesses. We arrived at dusk. The villa's familiar stone facade looked the same as it always had, yet everything had shifted. They were waiting in the main sitting area, my older sister standing with her arms crossed, my mother seated with her usual composed posture. Victor Klein, a longtime family acquaintance and member of the local financial board, who had been pulled into the reputation campaign, sat uncomfortably to the side. I had never met Rachel Torres before, but she was the client liaison from one of the firm's largest accounts who had received the anonymous complaints directly. Gregory had insisted on her presence for full transparency. My older sister spoke first, her voice carrying that same cold sarcasm. "You've caused enough trouble, Lauren. Mom and I have been patient, but this nonsense with the bank has to stop. Sign the release, and we can put this behind us like family." I didn't sit. I remained standing, phone in hand, and played the recording from the Lakeside Cafe. Their own words filled the room, the admission of the pact, the deliberate choice to drain the accounts for my older sister's post-divorce expenses, and my mother's villa upkeep, the expectation that I would simply comply, because that was what family did. My mother's face stayed composed at first, but my older sister's expression tightened into something sharper. When the recording ended, I spoke in the same detached tone I had used throughout. The bank has the full file now, including the misplaced contract copy and the final memo. Financial penalties have already been imposed. Restitution will be required, and the notations on your records are permanent. Gregory Lang stepped forward and handed each of them a copy of the bank's formal notice. The trust terms are clear. Unauthorized concealment triggers automatic penalties, full repayment with interest, plus court costs if contested. The evidence is overwhelming. Sophia added quietly that the anonymous tip had also provided the missing digital trail, closing every loophole they might have hoped for. My older sister tried one last jab, her voice low and vicious. "You always thought you were better than us, hiding behind your audits and your independence. This will ruin your name too." But the words landed flat. Victor Klein shifted uncomfortably and excused himself without comment. Rachel Torres met my eyes briefly, her expression unreadable, but professional, and later confirmed to Mr. Harlan that the matter was now resolved from the client side with no further action needed. The irreversible loss settled in during the quiet drive home that night. My older sister and my mother had chosen the pact over truth, and the family tie was severed completely in that room. There would be no more calls, no more demands, no more villa gatherings pretending everything was fine. The cost was real, the reputation damage at the firm lingered, forcing me to forego a partnership track promotion that had been close. Some clients pulled back slightly wary of any perceived personal complications. Yet the trust account was secured, the remaining funds protected, and the financial penalties imposed on them would follow them for years in the professional circles they valued most. I sat in my apartment the following week reviewing the final bank confirmation that the account was now under my sole oversight. The cold detachment had softened into something quieter, a lingering, empowered calm that felt earned rather than forced. I had chosen truth over toxic ties, and the choice had exacted its price. No dramatic victory, no full restoration of what was lost, only the steady knowledge that I had protected what was mine and refused to be drained any longer. The hillside villas and the family legacy they represented were no longer part of my story. 2 months later, the penalties were finalized. My older sister and my mother received formal notices requiring repayment of the drained amounts plus interest, along with the credit notations that would complicate any future loans or business dealings in our community. They never contacted me again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that the reputation damage they had tried to inflict on me had rebounded on them, instead whispers, now following their own names in the financial circles they once navigated so confidently. I continued my work at the firm with the same precision, eventually transitioning to a specialized consulting role that kept me independent from the internal politics. The quiet satisfaction came not from watching their downfall, but from the simple fact that I had walked away with my integrity intact. Truth over toxic ties, that was the only lesson that mattered in the end. I had learned it the hard way, paid the necessary price, and emerged with a calm that no one could take from me. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced a loyalty test from family that turned out to be nothing but concealed betrayal, comment your story now. What would you have done when the recording exposed the pact and the last document finally flipped everything?